Welcome to FNet Silica's We Talk IoT. We'll chat with innovators, experts, and business owners to learn how they are implementing IoT and using data to create new business opportunities. I am your host, Stefanie Ruth Heyduck. Today, we'll talk about how technology can guide us in making informed decisions for healthier, happier, and more productive workplaces. Joining me are two brilliant minds from Art Health Solutions, Phil Bell and Josh Jackman. Phil and Josh are both scientists and physiologists dedicated to studying how our work environments can be optimized, whether that's in the office, at home, or somewhere in between. We'll explore how leveraging real-world data gathered from wearables, smartphone apps, and more can not only boost productivity, but also enhance overall employee experience. If you ever wondered about the tangible impact of factors like lighting, noise, office design, or even your lunch choices on performance, you're about to find out. Welcome to the show, Phil and Josh. I'm glad to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much for having us.
What does your workplace look right now?
For me, I'm currently in the head office, if you like. So sitting in our boardroom, we've got a dispersed team. So Josh isn't with us, as you can see. He's probably, I think he's working from home there today. But yeah, we'll probably dig into a little bit around sort of remote working and hybrid working as we go through the podcast.
Cool.
And yes, I'm at home. So this is not planned, but a perfect setup where Phil's in the office and I'm at home, so we can give opposing opinions on different things.
That's excellent. Would you like the chance to introduce yourself and what it is you do at Art Health Solutions?
Sure, I'll go first and maybe talk a little bit about myself and give a quick background as to how we came about, if you like, as an organization. So I'm Phil. Obviously, I'm the CEO and the founder of the business. To give a quick background to myself, I'm a field sportsman. I did okay at a few different sports, but unfortunately wasn't quite good enough to be a full-time pro for any sort of sustained period. But the next best thing for me was to study sports science, because that got me close to the action. It allowed me to be able to have an influence on winners, and that's what I wanted to do as a human, if you like. So I studied that, did my undergrad, my master's, PhD, went and studied, worked in academia for a while before sort of working with athletes for a long time. And I loved how data was able to inform and influence and have a tangible impact upon the people that we were working with. And whilst I was kind of doing that and sort of straddling the corporate world and applied sports science, I started to experience being on the other side of the table, receiving health, well-being provision from organizations that I was working for. And whilst it was well-intentioned, it didn't necessarily feel that it was particularly targeted or influential or have an impact upon me. And it was at that point, myself and my late co-founder, Paul Smith, got our heads together and thought there's an opportunity here to have an impact on a broader demographic in the workplace by applying the exact same scientific philosophy and principles to a workplace, collecting data, synthesizing that data, understanding that data, and using it to provide a more tangible output to the staff and the workforces of organizations, and ultimately improve the health, well-being, and performance. And that was ultimately where ART Health Solutions was born. And we had this idea, and we've evolved from a few stages across the last 7 years. But yeah, that was a very quick synopsis of me and us as a business. I'll hand over to Josh to give him a bit of a background of himself.
Cool.
Well, I think probably much like many young people, I have a very similar story to Phil in that I had a sporting background and interest, and sort of Phil and my paths collided in the kind of cross-section between, I suppose, academia and that kind of high-performance world. So we had worked together a little bit at university, and then actually worked together in the Human Performance Lab, where we were supporting those elite athletes. So a very similar background in that sense. I also studied for a PhD in physiology. And I think when Paul and Phil co-founded ART and offered me the opportunity to get involved, it was, for me, a perfect opportunity to, again, very much apply, optimizing human performance, but in a slightly different way, and trying to apply that same science to people, but in the workplace environment. So, that's really been a passion of mine over that period, and that's obviously where I was delighted to join the business and have been on that journey as well ever since.
Fantastic. Both of you have emphasized the importance of using science and data in the workplace. Why is this data-driven approach so crucial?
I'm obviously quite biased in this because of my scientific background, but I think the ultimate answer to this is because every organization and every workforce is different. No two organizations are identical. And they have different demographics of people. They have different goals and different missions. They have different real estate. They have different philosophy. The list goes on. Everything is different about organizations. So if you're trying to influence an organization with some insight from a white paper or from another area, you're kind of missing the point. That doesn't represent you. That's a cross-section of somebody else. So you really need to understand influences that affect your organization and your people and your demographic. And, for me, the way that you do that is you collect data. Now, you have to collect data in the right way and have the ability to do so and understand and synthesize that data. But without doing that, you're really just shotgunning approaching to anything. You're just hoping that you throw somebody at the wall and it sticks. And from harping back to the kind of high performance sport world where we've came from, there's no way you would be doing that. You'd be very, very ultra specific about the individuals or the teams that you're working with to try and find out how they are performing, how you can improve that performance and optimize that performance. And that's through collecting data, understanding that data, doing it in a robust scientific method, and then using that insight to make decisions. And, it's no different in any walk of life from my perspective anyway.
What are some of the misconceptions? I have the feeling that especially in the recent months, there has the heated discussion about whether people should return to the office or if remote work is still a thing or if it's only for lazy people, has been really heating up again. So that is really an interesting topic to discuss, and then obviously also prove with data and the concepts you have been building.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take the misconceptions bit and I'll hand over to Josh around the kind of remote work versus traditional offices, if you like. But from, I think, a misconceptions perspective, I think a lot of organizations and a lot of people, because they're not from the world that we are perhaps in, think it's impossible to measure optimization, if you like. How do you do it? How do you go about it? And because it's such an unknown beast, if you like, we'll stay away from that and we'll just follow the white paper or something I've read on LinkedIn or something I've read here or there. And it's scary. And possibly there's a feeling that they might, if they do measure things, they might not stack up very well. And how does that look? And what do we do with it if that's the case?
Okay.
But the way I would answer that is, if you want to improve, or how are you ever going to improve if you don't try and understand where your starting point is and how you currently operate and are performing from that side of things. And that's where the benchmarking, the measurement, and understanding your workforce, your workplace comes into it. So yeah, I think those are a couple of misconceptions. We very much operate in that arena and are able to help people with that. So I'll pass over to Josh in terms of the remote versus traditional office setups.
Yes, I think obviously Phil and I in two separate spaces today give a good example of that, where our days at in a remote or traditional office will look very different. But I think what's important is not necessarily determining which of those is better, from a holistic perspective, but actually understanding kind of more of the nuance of the strengths and weaknesses of each, so that helps people, both organizations and employees, optimize their daily schedules and their working week to get the best out of whatever that looks like for them. So I think for some of our, key health metrics, when we look at the differences, we know that people are more active in the office. So they get around 2,000 to 3,000 more steps per day. Now that's probably due to the kind of natural activity that you get through the commute, through, more movement from a larger, floor plan, versus just having to go downstairs to grab a drink or go to the toilet. Those spaces are just bigger in the office. But then on the flip side, we know that people get around 20 minutes more sleep per night when working from home. And again, that probably relates to the fact that people don't have to commute. So, they're able to sort of save that time and attribute that to other areas. Now, those might sound like sort of quite small differences on a daily basis, but I think actually added up over, the course of a year or, a longer period of time, actually they do really make a significant difference. That could be the equivalent of performing several marathons worth of, steps more than you would have otherwise done, or actually even achieving around 4 to 5 extra nights worth of sleep. So whilst, that narrative can sometimes be quite polarized, you'll often hear from Phil and I, the phrase probably "it depends" in terms of, which is better. And I think for any organization or any individual to truly achieve those high levels of well-being, performance, it's about bringing, awareness to the impact of how these things, play out in your daily lives, bringing attention to what you can do, and obviously then controlling the factors that you have. So for example, knowing what I know about remote work and, that's associated with being more sedentary, I can incorporate, a walk in the morning to kind of simulate my commute. I can get out at lunchtime or have a walking meeting with a colleague. So I'm able to build some of the things in that I know can mitigate those, those detrimental effects.
Why do you think this discussion is so polarized?
Oh, a good question. I would suggest it's probably to do with, to an extent, generational opinions on things and what work was and what it should be. And you read a lot of things in the media and particularly in social media around X, Y, or Z organization. We're all going back to the office, so we're all going to work from home. And it grabs attention. And I think there's a thirst for that attention sometimes because they want to be seen as that leader and that, shining light. But, whilst they do get that attention and it kind of feeds that cycle, we would always argue that those polarized opinions and thoughts on things are not the optimal strategy for an organization. And they certainly shouldn't be necessarily put on a pedestal as the right opinion just because Spotify decide they're going totally remote. That doesn't mean everybody else should go totally remote just because they're a really successful organization. They've obviously got the capacity, or their leadership anyway, feels like they've got the capacity to be able to work that way, and it grabs headlines and everyone's like, yeah, let's all work from home. We're a new company and this is the way forward. But I'd probably argue if they really dug into the detail around their workforce and their people and the needs of their people, that probably isn't right for all of their people. And there would be a better way that is, more blended in their approach. But like I say, I think there's a thirst for headline grabbing, a bit of a generational thing around what work should be. It's all the generations who tend to be leadership should be in the office. Stereotypically speaking, not saying that for everybody, but I'd say those two are pretty big influential pieces on the polarization problem.
But it's good then that your work and the trends and findings you have come across are data proven, and then it's no more guessing and no more attention grabbing possible. So that's nice.
100%.
And I imagine it also has not only influence on the workforce itself, but also the society as a whole. I just remembered that during the pandemic, my doctors would be really happy that everybody was working from home because their commute became just so much easier because there were no more traffic jams, because the workforce that did not necessarily have to commute but was forced to be in an office was cramming up the motorways, and he was really happy about it. And he said, you should all be like that, always be like that. And for him, it made it so much easier because obviously he could not work from home, being a dentist. So even online consultation wasn't an option for him. But that's interesting concepts where you then, where then where then the philosophy of the workplace also spilled into other industries.
Yeah, 100%. There's a perfect example there
Mm.
of horses for courses in that sense. Not every organization can work from home, even if they think they can. And we as leaders, we have to really think about the decisions we're making around our working strategy for our people, and try and make it the most optimal um, environment created to allow our people to flourish in the roles that they do.
Absolutely.
I think, for anyone who does want to still avail of those quieter commuting times, Monday and Friday definitely still see lower turn-up rates in the office. So I think that's something that people really benefit from, is they find that there's a quieter commute, there's a quieter environment in the office, so they get the benefits of the office space, but actually with a reduced head count there. So I know that's
Yeah,
something
right.
that typically Monday and Fridays are days that people don't go into the offices so much. So for anyone who does prefer those routines, those are good days to hit.
Yeah, that's right. There's just so many ways now to make it flexible, and and create an environment where everybody can work to their best ability and productivity. Yeah. So it's always interesting that it's now more flexible, and there's just so many angles to look at this topic, right?
100%.
hmm and aside from the home office versus in-office discussion, you also mentioned elements like lighting, noise levels, and even nutrition when it comes to employee performance and well-being. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think that there's a good amount of research, both in the industry and in academic research, as well as some of the findings that we've collected that really strongly demonstrate how your environment, the workplace design, or your ways of working can really significantly impact your productivity and well-being. To give a few examples, probably one of the most studied is for example the impact of CO2 levels,
hmm
in particular in relation to cognitive performance. So that's going to be something that is going to be really of interest for organizations if they want their people to be as productive as possible, but also for yourself, if you want to be able to think clearly, to focus, to be able to really do your best work. I've actually just recently got an air quality monitor myself, and it's been really interesting to see that sat here in my home office,
hmm
when I close the door, how the CO2 levels go up quite quickly, over 1,000 parts per million, within probably an hour. And that it's at those levels when you can start to see impacts to cognitive performance and health. So having that data and knowing that helps me influence my behaviors, where I might open the door every so often if I
hmm
need that quiet time, but just to kind of refresh and bring some fresh air into the room. But I think one of the biggest benefits that we've seen from our data as well is the impact from natural light, or office conditions that simulate natural light. So things like circadian lighting systems, which mimic the fluctuations in the color temperature of light throughout the working day, to more closely match people's biological rhythms.
hmm
And in our projects, we've seen that has a significant impact on people's cognitive performance, in particular the decision making. So I think from a behavioral perspective, we know people naturally gravitate towards the outskirts of buildings, towards areas where there is more natural light. Um, and that really does have a significant effect. So being able to position your home desk
hmm
in an area where you're facing a window is really key, or being able to find a space in an office where you have that natural light is going to be really important as well. And then in terms of the overall design, there's many other aspects, such as biophilia, so connection to nature, or plants in the office, different types of furniture, and also things like providing sit-stand desks. So being able to influence
hmm
people's sedentary time, we know, is one of the biggest risk factors for office-based workers. But being able to provide this variety of furniture and workstation settings, and giving people a kind of connection to nature, and really high quality environmental conditions, helps really reduce stress, improve people's comfort, and ultimately enhance their performance and productivity.
hmm Interesting. And how do you collect that data?
So for us as an organization, we've built our service offering around a holistic approach to really understand some of the key health and performance metrics. So ART, we have the ability to collect wearable data, so information
Mm-hmm.
from things like Fitbit, from Garmin, from Apple Health, that pull passively that data from employees, either provided by an organization or cell phone devices, into our processing platform. So we're able to understand how key health metrics like physical activity, how steps, resting heart rate as physiological indicator, and then things like sleep, are kind of being impacted by the workplace. We also have our proprietary smartphone application where we're
Mm-hmm.
able to, I reference being able to measure cognitive performance. That's how we, objectively measure that. So we've taken tasks that are typically performed in, academic settings and implemented them into a smartphone application, which gives us, a validated way to really measure cognitive performance. So things like people's focus, their working memory, their reaction time, or their decision making, and really understand how that can be impacted by the workplace. And then we supplement that with both in-app and more general workplace experience surveys. And then the sort of fourth stream, if you like, is being able to integrate with building sensor data. So things like air quality monitors,
Mm-hmm.
occupancy data. But the real, I suppose, secret sauce and, magic is where those things come together. So being able to understand how, the environment that someone working in is impacting them on their sleep levels, or, how
Mm-hmm.
the different types of routines that people have are impacting upon their cognitive performance. So the correlations and your ability to understand the interactions of those different metrics is really what brings that to life, and ultimately it gives us a really great lens into how the workplace itself is impacted upon people, and in particular those key health and performance metrics. So really putting a human feel on that and being able to inform
Mm-hmm.
organizations from that human experience perspective.
Mm-hmm. Is there have you come across a finding or a set piece of data that really surprised you in your research?
I think often it's, the evidence that comes through is, sometimes really impactful because you might have a hypothesis, but actually, when you conduct a, piece of independent research, you obviously are led by the data. So I think being able to see in plain kind of, hard evidence how something comes about, that can be really powerful. So a good example, is just recently we conducted our own internal study, looking at the impact of taking an active break. So Joe Wicks, who's a big personal trainer and influencer here in the UK, was running a movement hour. So he was encouraging corporate organizations to try and get active, to demonstrate the benefit of movement. So we aligned with that. We got involved as an organization. We, conducted our own, research study around that. So we looked at conducting our own baseline. So we, had a week where we didn't perform the active breaks. We assessed our cognitive performance, our stress levels, and various other things. And then we repeated that, after conducting that movement hour, where we all took part in different types of high intensity workouts. Some people went for a walk, others went to the gym and did a weight session. And it was, to be honest, really amazing to see the impact where it produced a tangible benefit to people's cognitive performance. So we were seeing people actually after the break had higher levels of decision making, of focus, of their working memory. But it also improved people's stress levels. People were less stressed and they were
Mm-hmm.
happier. But I think the key thing as well with that was that in the baseline week, there was sometimes that people reported feeling, tired or, slightly fatigued. But actually that number went to zero when after the active breaks. So, just by getting out and doing that activity in whatever form it might be, really, demonstrate how it can energize people. So that
Mm-hmm.
as a kind of concept, we would hypothesize based on what we know that should have a benefit, but being able to see those numbers, sometimes really, exciting to be able to then talk about.
That's really cool. And it's probably not only about the hour or the importance of physical movement, but just taking small breaks in general.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the concept of micro breaks, which is essentially, a short break that could be, as little as a few minutes, really can have a really powerful impact. So, the active break is something that can be done in those sorts of times, but similarly, mindful micro breaks is again an area that we've looked into and seen positive effects. So just being able to take the time to, to go through a breathing exercise or to go through a mindfulness routine, again, within 10 minutes can have a tangible impact on reducing stress levels, and again, giving people that clarity of mind to be able to improve their thought process, their cognitive performance. So there's many ways that you can implement a break, but those short micro breaks are a great tool, whether it's being active, being mindful, just giving you that short moment to pause and reset throughout the day. And going back to a sporting context, it's very common that no one would expect that you would exercise continuously and never rest and recover. You have to get those periods of rest and recovery in. And in a workplace environment, being able to get those in small snippets throughout the day will without doubt improve your longevity and your performance.
Yeah. I wonder if we now have to get up and stretch or do something to get
Quite
to get
comfortable.
because we've been sitting here concentrated and focused for half an hour now.
Probably wouldn't be a bad thing, but
Yeah. Do you have a small tip for I think it's probably especially remote workers when you are glued to your video conferencing software for 8 hours straight and do not have and have to really carefully ask for a bio break. Do you have a tip for people who what can they do?
I think it's about, for me, it's about being disciplined with how you organize your diary to an extent, and have that championed as well through the leadership within your business. So you just give a great example there. And I know friends of mine who work remotely who, are 8 hours a day stuck in this position, and it's not healthy, it's not good. And really, they should be planning their diaries that doesn't happen. But, I guess one way that can be, if a tip, if you like, is to have meetings that are 50 minutes or 55 minutes or 25 minutes, where there is that opportunity to get up, walk around, make a cup of tea, go to the toilet, whatever it may be. And that is not a workplace benefit as such. It's part of your culture. It's it's championed by your leadership, and they would do exactly the same thing, rather than somebody thinking, "Oh, I need to sneak off to do this." That shouldn't be the case. This is about creating a culture that supports well-being, and ultimately supporting well-being supports performance. So it's not a leap of faith and a leadership team needs to take to encourage that. It's actually beneficial to them as a leadership and getting more out of their people. So it's changing that mindset of people aren't sneaking off; they're doing this to help the business themselves and ultimately the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
That's great.
I just add that that it's very much a two-way street. As Phil rightly says, the organization can set the culture, but ultimately the individuals have to take accountability themselves as well. You can't really have one without the other. So I think it's absolutely about setting the culture, demonstrating the behavior from a leadership perspective, but then also from an individual perspective, actually living and breathing that as well. And really taking that on, and taking the accountability to look after yourself as well, which does mean being proactive, as Phil said, organizing your diary, taking those breaks where needed, speaking with colleagues, if there is an opportunity to take a walking meeting or to do something slightly more social, because often those conversations really spark that kind of snowball effect where others see that and then start to feel more comfortable to do it themselves. And it's amazing what those small actions can actually build up into once you really get going with things.
It's also interesting once you work in an organization that is that has more cultural diversity, not only within the teams but as an organization as a whole. If you have like entities in different countries, and then you have a meeting in maybe an Asian country, and then it's really common to just have a nap at your desk for 15 minutes and then be refreshed again. Yeah. Where
And I
the
think
Western colleagues are like, are we allowed to sleep at work? What? It's completely natural, and there's no one looking weird at you.
I think that's a really interesting example you give, and really plays into the point what I spoke about earlier about understanding your demographic and culture of your entire workforce. If you've got a global workforce, you can have a multitude of different expectations from both sides of the table, from a local leadership versus a local workforce in Singapore versus somebody over in the US versus somebody in the UK. It's all very, very different. So taking a broad brush approach to absolutely anything, never mind health, well-being and the likes of that, it just doesn't make sense. You've really got to understand your reality and your people to make a decision that's going to have a positive impact.
Absolutely. But as you said, adopting this cultural shift, it requires a change of mindset, which is really hard to achieve in any organization, at least the ones I have seen. It's, can be really exhausting to try and initiate a culture change and get everybody on board, and then actually also make it tangible, that it actually sticks after all the consultants have left. What strategies do you recommend?
Yeah, okay. I think and I've probably alluded to this already, it kind of leadership buy-in and getting a champion at a senior level is really important. Now, that's not always easy, but in an ideal world, leadership who, make decisions on pretty much everything in the business informed by data, if they're not using data to make decisions around workplace experience, workplace performance, health, well-being, then it's kind of contrary to what they use data on to financially forecast or understand sales and marketing strategy and success or operational efficiency. So, if they're using data in that sense, in that world, then it shouldn't be a big leap of faith to start, using data in the health, well-being and experience world. Now, that's an ideal world to get a champion at that level, and it's not always the case. And I think from our experience, we often get lots of buy-in from, say, middle management, who are really forward-thinking. They might be slightly, again, stereotyping a slightly younger generation who've got, a slightly different view on the world and what's important. And but they are the future leaders as well. And we often, try and empower them with the tools, the information, the knowledge to be able to try and get that senior leadership buy-in. And what we found is once you get that senior leadership buy-in, and you can collect it, and we can get, solid results to take back and convince and take people on that journey, that's when it starts to have the impact. So, it's not an easy and an easy culture change in certain instances, but if you do get, the ideal situation where you can marry up a really enthusiastic sort of middle manager and a leader who is forward thinking, and you marry those two things together, that's where the beautiful stuff flows and you get the change.
Yeah, and I think as Phil said, we've got lots of learnings from this over our journey over the last 7 or so years. Both in terms of things that worked really well, as Phil just said, but also things that can be learned from. And I think a really nice summary, that I suppose I'll direct people to if they want to read a bit further into this, is a McKinsey report that's just recently been released at the start of the year on thriving workplaces. And they, talk about these sort of 6 evergreen principles, if you like, for how can organizations truly address workforce health. And, they talk about how, there's no one size fits all, and, every organization is very different. So very much, aligning to sort of the narrative that we talk about and, really play out in terms of our own work. But, some of these things include, really understanding the baseline status of your employees. So being able to actually diagnose from a data perspective helps you then inform where to go. Being able to actually develop those initiatives to drive a sustainable and healthy workforce is going to be key. Piloting and testing interventions, to test and learn. Again, investments in these things can often, be significant, and the decision making therefore comes with significant risk. But if you're able to test that on a small scale before, rolling something out more broadly, you can help really inform those decisions. And also, the concept of fail fast, can be attributed there as well. Another one is, tracking key metrics. So 3 to 5 key metrics that, really measure that success. So you're able to, as Phil said, typically in a financial or a, sales and marketing perspective, you'd have those metrics. So being able to have those in this environment, it helps, inform, your key performance indicators. We've talked about ensuring the leadership commitment and sponsorship. And then the last one is, really embedding that into the organizational culture. So, what comes, within those is nuanced and, requires a bit more depth. But I think that's a nice starting point as a report for people to go to, just to kind of start to understand some of those things, in a bit more detail. And I think, is a nice summary from, what we've seen over the years that we've been working in this field, and, align very much to what we were about as well.
Cool. I'll make sure I'll link the report in the show notes, so people can read up on it. Before we wrap up, where do you see your approach headed in the next 5 to 10 years? What are your plans? What are your visions?
Well, I think generally we're, the space we're talking about, the space we're working in, is something that is gaining a lot of traction. People are starting to understand the importance and the impact of it. And, because of that snowball effect, we see, a bright future for the workplace. I think if I was going to, advise upon what you should be doing as an organization now, if you want to really, maintain your position in the market, is start to really understand your real world scenario, what workplace experience, health, well-being is in your current real world scenario. It's, as I talked about earlier on in the show, it's very different for every single organization. So it's great that there is a movement and an understanding that this is important. But now it's about, if you want to stay ahead and compete in this war for talent and create a workplace where people want to come and work for you, you really need to start to understand how you can optimize it. And that starts with understanding where your baseline is, and something that Josh talked to there with the evergreen principles. That you can argue the employee is a consumer now, and they're going to have a decision to make around, particularly in your high performing, high talent people. They're going to choose, not necessarily on how many pounds or euros that you give them. It's going to be the whole package. What can you do for me that is going to maintain my health, well-being, and what's my experience going to be like working for you versus your competitor down the road? So there's definitely a big business case to get on board with this. Obviously, we're slightly biased in that because that's what we do, and we can help people create those better workplace experiences through data. But if you listen to everything of what we've talked about in this podcast, the business case is there. Now it's about taking that next step forward and investing in it.
Yeah, I think my prediction really is that, this data-driven workplace health and performance is really only at the beginning. I think we are just scratching the surface. I think, from applied research, organizations like ourselves, but also others in the field are starting to really bring about these kind of powerful case studies that, as Phil said, really can tangibly demonstrate the business case, to a point where it's just become so much of a win-win for organizations, because I think there is a lot of untapped potential out there in terms of where organizations can see a benefit, not only just for happier and healthier employees, but ultimately higher performance, which is going to impact the bottom line. So I think as we start to move the dial, we as an industry create more robust case studies for this effect. I think, more and more will get involved in it. And I think the key for any organization, thinking about, what step they could take, is that taking one step is the most important thing to do, because I think if you stand still, you will fall behind. Organizations that are prioritizing this are starting to see how they can attract and retain, the top talent. We know that it's starting to impact on, business performance. And ultimately, I think whilst we're in that, the infancy of that moving forward in the field, it's going to soon become a time when that isn't so new, and you know, if you're in the minority, you're going to be left behind.
100%.
And if you had to pick a song for the soundtrack of this episode, what would you put on it?
Go on, Josh. I'll let you go on that one.
Well, I'm interested to what we both pick. I'm gonna go with "Human" by The Killers.
Okay, cool.
So
Nice.
obviously, what we're about is is data, but really making it human.
Yeah.
Nice.
I came up with "Power" by Kanye West, and I think it's because I think we all have the power
Mhm.
to make a difference and do something about this there now as a leadership community, if you like.
Mhm.
We have the power to make a difference. We just need to take that step forward and do it.
Terrific. Those songs will be a lovely addition to our playlist. You can listen to it on Spotify and on YouTube. Phil, Josh, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ruth. It's been a pleasure.